Alright, so the next general group of protists that we're going to look at are the alveolates, and they're special because underneath their membranes they have tiny air sacs. The name alveolate may be familiar to you if you remember with the alveoli, the little tiny air sacs in the lungs, and that's where the name comes from. It's similar to that. Okay, dinoflagellates are important because they're often one of the constituents of phytoplankton. So remember, phytoplankton are the plankton that can undergo photosynthesis. Some of them are colonial, and sometimes they're reinforced with cellulose. Uh, Interestingly, they can form symbiotic relationships with coral. Remember that corals are animals that have heterotrophic nutrition, and so where do corals get their energy from? They always have to be in symbiotic relationships with something that goes through photosynthesis. So one of those things that can be in a symbiotic relationship with the coral is these dinoflagellates. They're also important because they can do bioluminescence, and often this causes red tides. You've probably heard not before not to swim in a red tide, and the reason for that is that there's a toxin being released by these protists which can cause you harm. And if it gets into the seafood that's in the area and you eat that seafood, it can even cause your death. So, something best to be avoided. The apicomplexans are also an important group, mainly because they cause malaria. So, the Plasmodium parasite that enters into humans is an example of an apicomplexan. You're looking at it over here in the bottom right hand corner. You're seeing some of those plasmodium that cause malaria entering into the cell. Their name comes from the fact that their tip is specialized, and that's allowing it to enter into the host cell. So apex is the tip, and complexan, it's complicated, and so those special tips are allowing them to enter into their hosts. Okay. I highly suggest that you just take a look at page 556, which has the life cycle of malaria inside of it. Um, it's interesting to see how their life cycle is. And one of the things that's characteristic of this group is not only are they parasites, but they often have complicated life cycles. For example, the Plasmodium requires two hosts, mosquitoes and humans. I think we read an article at some point in this class or in the previous class about how the nets that were sprayed with insecticides to prevent the spread of malaria, that many of the mosquitoes had developed a resistance to that insecticide, and those sleeping nets were no longer as effective as they were before. So now a lot of the work has been on genetically engineering the mosquitoes so that they are resistant to the plasmodia if it's not going to work with the human. So kind of an interesting development in the prevention of malaria. Also, another group of alveolates are the ciliates, and these are the ones that have many cilia on their exterior to help them move around. Um, they often also have those contractile vacuoles for living in fresh water, where when placed in a hypotonic solution, the water is rushing into the cell, and so it needs that contractile vacuole to push it out. Right here is a ciliate down here in the bottom left-hand corner. This is the thing that you often see represented or representative of the protists. There's also, just a good diagram of a ciliate on page 557 of your text. Alright, so the next group that we're going to take a look at is the straminophiles, and what makes them special is that they have two different types of flagella, one that underneath a microscope looks hairy and one that looks smooth. You can find a diagram of that on page 558 of your text, figure 28.13, to get an idea of what types of flagella these organisms have. So the first group of straminophile that we're going to take a look at are the, I don't even know how to pronounce this, oomycetes, and they are the water molds. And one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that these are not molds, they are not funguses. So their name is kind of disingenuous to the fact that they are in the protists. What's special about the oomycetes is that they have walls of cellulose. They used to have plastids, but they don't anymore. So kind of interestingly enough, they evolved to not have photosynthetic capabilities. They're usually decomposers, and one of the interesting anecdotes is that they were responsible for the Irish potato famine, for those of you who are history buffs. Looking right over here in the diagram on the right hand side, you can see a water mold decomposing this, I think it's a mosquito larvae. And if you've had fish before, and you ever went away on vacation for a week or something like that, and you came back and your fish was dead, it'd be pretty common to see something like this surrounding it, decomposing it. Diatoms are also part of the group of the straminophiles, and these are really cool organisms, mainly because they use basically silica, the same thing that goes towards making glass, to form these outer structures on the outside of their cell membranes. And what you see here in this image right there is just a variety of diatoms, the different shapes and textures that they take on. And they're super, super strong. And the reason why they have these strong outer shells is to protect themselves from predators. They're one of the main components of phytoplankton, so they are photosynthetic. And they usually reproduce asexually, although they are able to reproduce sexually. That's actually one of the key things about protists, is that there's quite a wide diversity in terms of life cycles and how these organisms are able to reproduce. Often they can go between asexual and sexual forms of reproduction. Alright, so there is a number of different types of algae, and interestingly they're not all a part of the same group or taxas. So golden algae and brown algae are both a part of the straminophiles, so they both have the smooth and hairy flagella. Golden algae, they're given their name because they have yellow and brown pigments inside of them that give them a golden appearance. Brown algae are really important. I mean, if you're going to know maybe the top 5 protists of this group, you better know brown algae. And the reason is that brown algae can come together, well, not come together, they are multicellular, and they can form these giant kelp forests like you see here in the bottom right hand picture. For those of you who've seen underwater documentaries of any sort of oceanic life, these are fairly common for you to see. Whenever you see otters, for example, they're often playing in these kelp forests. And they're really important in marine communities because they're an important part of the food chain. You've got photosynthetic activity, which is giving energy to other types of life forms that live off of this. They look like plants, however, this is an example of convergent evolution. Okay, they are not plants. They don't have roots. They don't have stems, they don't have leaves, and they don't have vascular tissue. Vascular tissue is what helps water go from the roots up to the top of the leaves. So please don't think that the brown algae are the most closely related to plants. They aren't, although they are photosynthetic and they are multicellular. Alright, we'll continue with these in the next video.